All right, we are going to finish up section 9.1 today and we'll talk about parabolas. We're going to be graphing parabolas and writing equations of parabolas, but in a different way than you've ever done before. You are very used to drawing a parabola where the important things are the vertex and the x-intercepts. So you're used to drawing maybe a vertex here and a parabola and identifying where it hits the x-axis. The x-axis, x-intercepts, those would be your solutions or your roots or zeros. Or x-intercepts. And the vertex was another important piece. And you also did learn about axis of symmetry, which goes through the vertex. So, that is what you have focused on in the past. But we're going to approach parabolas from a different point of view now. Excuse me. So here's a little demonstration of a new way to graph a parabola. Okay, so point B, when it reaches the very minimum here, that's the vertex. But then there's this point inside the parabola called a focus. And then there's this line outside of the parabola called a directrix. And I want you to notice what's happening from C to B and from B to A. And I have them up here so you can kind of watch. So they stay the same distance from C to B and from B to A. No matter where you are on the parabola, the distance from the focus to the vertex and the vertex to the directrix is going to be equal. Any point though, point B, C to B, B to A is equal. So there's this focus that we've never talked about before and this directrix that we've never talked about before, and this relationship between the focus and any point on the parabola, and then from that point to the directrix remains equal. So here is kind of our new way to approach parabolas. The focus will always be inside the parabola. So you can kind of think of it like Pac-Man eating those little dots. So it's sort of the same thing. A parabola is going to have the focus on the inside. We call the vertex HK, so very similar to the center of the circle from yesterday. We still will be talking about axis of symmetry. And then this idea that the midpoint between the focus and the directrix is the vertex. So between the focus and the directrix, halfway between those two is the vertex. This distance right here from focus to vertex we're going to call P, and that'll be the same as the distance from the vertex to the axis of symmetry. Okay? So here is our equation we're going to use if our parabola opens up or down. The H always goes with the X, the K always goes with the Y, so that's kind of similar to circles. But now the X information is being squared, the Y information is not. And then you've got something outside of the parentheses on the non-squared side, and whatever's out in front here is 4P. Remember, P is the distance from focus to vertex and vertex to directrix. And I have that written right here. P is the distance from vertex to focus and from vertex to directrix. So knowing that piece of information is important because you plug it in here and multiply it by 4. If P is positive, your parabola is opening up. If P is negative, your parabola is opening down. So that's pretty important. That's why I have all this stuff highlighted. The focus is always inside, the directrix is always outside. Now, this formula is the formula you're going to use when it's opening up or down. The x stuff will be squared when it's opening up or down. So here's an example. I'm giving you an equation, and we're going to take that and graph our parabola. So the vertex is always HK. H always goes with the x's, k always goes with the y's. So in this case, our vertex is 2, -5. So we could plot that point right now. And we're going to always label everything. So that's our vertex. All right, then we're going to focus on P. So right here, we can see that 4P equals 12. So therefore, P has to equal 3. And since it's positive, that means that our graph is going to open up. So right now, what I'm going to do is just graph a parabola opening up from that vertex. We're not going to worry about the x-intercepts. We're not going to worry about how skinny or wide it is. Just draw any U-shape through that vertex. But what we're going to focus more on is the focus and the directrix. So P, again, if we go back here, P goes from vertex to focus and from vertex to directrix. So if I want to figure out where the focus is, I'm going to use P. I'm going to go 3 up, and there's my focus, and label it with an F. And then we're going to need to go 3 down from the vertex, and our directrix will be a horizontal line, like that. And we're going to want you to identify where those are located. So the focus, if you figure out what coordinate this is, it's 2, -2. And then we want you to write an equation of this horizontal line. So that equation of a horizontal line would be y equals, and where is it? It's down at -8. So we're going to want you to identify vertex, focus, directrix, and draw the graph. Now, we also are going to have parabolas that open left or right, and you're not used to that. If they're opening left or right, the way that you tell is now the y stuff is being squared. So just to recap, see how when it was opening up or down, it was the x stuff being squared? Opening left and right, now it's the y stuff being squared. And just be careful here because the vertex is still HK. H is always with the x, K is always with the y. A lot of people always just read left to right, like they read this number first, then this number, but you have to be careful. The H goes first, K goes second. So the same idea applies, that the distance from the vertex to the focus, so this distance right here is P, and the distance from the directrix to the vertex is P. Again, that's highlighted here. Same thing, if P is positive, now it's going to open right. If P is negative, it's going to open left. And the focus is always inside and the directrix is always outside. But now do you see the directrix is going to be a vertical line? So let's try an example here. So here's our equation. We're going to write what our vertex is, focus, directrix, and draw the picture. So remember that the vertex is always HK. H always goes with the x's. So in this case, H is -2 from over here. And K, well, technically, this is y minus 0 squared, so K is 0. So our vertex is -2, 0. We could plot that on our graph and label it. All right, and then we're going to figure out what P is. So it looks like 4P equals -8. So P is -2. So since that's negative, and we know that since the y's are being squared, that's opening left or right. If P is negative, it's going to be opening to the left. So I would go ahead and draw your parabola opening to the left through that vertex. And again, don't worry about how wide it is or anything. And now use your value of P to figure out your focus and your directrix. So again, from the vertex to the directrix is P, and from the vertex to the focus is P. Same thing down here, if it's pointing left. So the focus is always inside the parabola, and I'm going to go 2, since P is 2. 2 inside the parabola, right there, would be the focus, and then 2 away from the parabola will be your directrix, and it's a vertical line now. So the focus is at -4, 0, and the directrix is a vertical line, so it's x equals, and it's on the y-axis, so x equals 0. Okay, let's try another one. Now we did a problem similar to this with circles. We need to write it in standard form first. Right now it's not written that way. And we need to know which standard form to write it in. So is it going to be this one, where the y's are squared, or this one where the x's are squared? Well, if you take a look, you can see that the y's are being squared. So we're going to model it after this one right here. So I'm just going to write that. All right, so this is how we want it to look. So I'm going to put all the y's on the left side and everything else on the right side. So I'm going to leave the y squared and the -6y on the left. And I'm going to move all the other stuff over to the right side. So this 10x, I'll subtract that over. And the 49, I'll subtract that over. Okay, now we want it to look like a quantity squared. So we're going to need to complete the square. And just remember, whatever we do to one side, we're going to have to do to the other side. So we take this number in front of the y, we divide it by 2, square it, and we're going to get 9. So if I add a 9 here, I also have to add a 9 there. Now the left side is going to factor, and it should always factor into two identical things when you've completed the square. So this will factor into y minus 3, which we can write as that quantity squared. And then over on the right, we've got a -10x, and then -49 plus 9 is -40. But we want it to look like this over here. We want to have something out in front of parentheses. So what can we take out of both of these terms? We could take out a -10, and we would be left with x plus 4. So now this equation looks a lot more like this. Okay, so we need to identify the vertex. The vertex is always HK. Remember, the h goes with the x's and the k goes with the y's. So the h would be -4, and the k would be a 3. So -4, 3 is our vertex. Always label it. And then we need to figure out what's happening with p. So remember, this number out in front here is 4p. So it looks like -10 equals 4p. We divide by 4, p is -2.5. Okay, now we got to figure out which way this thing is opening. So the y's are being squared. When the y's are being squared, that means it's left or right here. When the y's are being squared, it's left or right. And because the p is negative, it's going to be opening left. So take your parabola, make it opening left through that vertex. Okay, now the focus is going to be inside the parabola. How far inside? 2.5. Okay, so I'm going to need to add some tick marks here. So I'm going to go 1, 2.5 in, and that's my focus. And then I'm going to go 1, 2.5, and that's my directrix. So where's that focus located? It's located at -6.5 up 3. And the directrix is a vertical line, so x equals at -1.5. Okay, so we had to do completing the square, just like we had to yesterday with circles. Okay, now these are the formulas that are on your formula sheet. And so I mostly use these. I mean, this is not a formula, it's just reminding you the vertex is HK. If you want to use these formulas to find the focus in the directrix, you certainly can. I just don't ever use them because I'm always using P. So if I start from the vertex, I'm going to go P amount in to get the focus and P amount out to get the directrix. But you have these formulas if you want to use them. Okay, so now we're going to go the other direction. Now we're going to come up with the equation. And I always start with a sketch. You need to pay attention to whether it's opening up, down, or left, right, because that's going to determine which formula to use. The vertex is important because that's your HK, and P is important because that's part of the formula. So always start with a sketch. So here's our first example. Find the equation of the parabola with the vertex 2, 1 and focus 2, 4. All right, 2, 1 would be right there. That's the vertex. And 2, 4 is the focus. So you should be able to tell which way this is going to open. Because remember, like Pac-Man always eats the dot, the parabola always eats the focus. So the parabola is going to need to open up in order for that to happen. So it's opening up, so P is going to be positive, and that determines our formula. If it's opening up or down, the x's are the thing that are being squared. So here's our general formula. We know the vertex, H and K, we got that figured out. So we can say right now x minus 2 quantity squared equals 4py minus 1. Remember, that's not squared, just the x's are squared. And we have to figure out what p is. Well, p is the distance between the vertex and the focus. So what is this distance right here? That distance is 3. So p is going to equal 3. So we're going to plug that in right here. So our equation will be x minus 2 quantity squared equals 4 times 3, so 12, y minus 1. And that will be the equation of our line. So drawing a sketch is helpful for you to figure out what P is and to figure out if it's opening up, down, left, or right, because that'll determine your equation. Okay, here's another one. This time we got a vertex at the origin and a focus at 0, -3. So that should help you determine which way this thing is opening. Focus is always on the inside, so this is opening down. So if it's opening down, we know P is going to be negative. And our equation, if it's up or down, is where the x's are being squared. So here's our general equation. Right now we know that the vertex is at the origin, so we know our h and our k. So we know it's going to be x minus 0 squared, and then it's going to be 4 times something, and then y minus 0. We need to figure out what p is. Again, p is the distance from vertex to focus. But also remember, in this case, p should be negative because it's opening down. And it's what distance away? 1, 2, 3, -3. So put a -3 in for p. So it's going to be, now you don't need the -0. You could just say x squared equals 4 times -3 is -12. And then y minus 0, you could just say is y. So the vertex was at the origin, and then here's our equation. Okay. Next one. Draw a sketch. This time, we're not given the vertex. We're given the focus and the directrix. So the focus is at 3, -1. Okay, 3, -1. Right there's the focus. And the directrix is at x equals 7. So what you need to remember, what kind of a line is that when it's x equals? It's going to be a vertical line. So it'll be a vertical line at 7. Okay, now this should help us identify which way it's opening. Your directrix is vertical, so that means it's opening either left or right. And it has to eat the focus. So this needs to be opening left. But we have to figure out where the vertex is going to be. And if we go back to when we first saw a picture, the vertex has to be halfway between the focus and the directrix. So where is halfway? Halfway between these two things. Looks like it would be right here. So that is your vertex. What are the coordinates of that point? Looks like 5, -1. My labeling is a little off. That F should be a little closer to this blue dot, but I think you get the idea. So we're opening to the left because it's got to go through the vertex and the focus should be on the inside. And then P is the distance from the vertex to the focus or from the vertex to the directrix. Since it's opening left, P should be negative. And so what is that distance between these two and between these two? It's -2. All right, since our graph is opening to the left, the equation is the one where the y's are being squared. So there's our general equation, and now we're just going to plug stuff in. So remember your vertex HK. So it'll be y minus -1 squared, 4 times -2, because that was P, and then x minus 5. And just clean that up a little bit. It'll be y plus 1 squared equals -8 times x minus 5. That would be your equation. Okay. Next one. Okay, this time we're given a vertex at 5, 3. And then we're told that the parabola goes through the points 4.5, 4, and 4.5, 2. So 4.5, 4. Okay, 4.5, 4, and 4.5, 2. Something like that. So that's going to help us indicate which way this thing is opening. So if we draw and connect the dots, it's opening to the left. So that means that P is going to be negative. It also means that if it's opening to the left, that means our equation has the y's being squared. And we know our vertex, H and K. Got that figured out. So as of right now, I know that it's y minus 3 quantity squared equals 4 times something, and then x minus 5. So we need to figure out what P is. All I know right now is that P is negative because it's opening to the left. So how are we going to figure out P? Well, I'm not given the focus, so I can't count. I'm not given the directrix, so I can't count. But I am given some points. So what I could do is plug one of those points in. So let's plug in, how about this point, for x and for y. So put 4 in for y, put 4.5 in for x. All right, so this will be 1 squared, which is 1, equals 4p times -0.5. 4 times -0.5 is -2. And so then it looks like -1/2 is what p is. All right, so now we can write our equation. So we're going to do 4 times -1/2, because that's what p was. So our final equation will be this. So we had to plug in a point in order to solve for p, because I couldn't just count over I didn't know the focus and I didn't know the directrix. So again, if I fill in this information, the vertex was at 5, 3, and the P that we found was -1/2. Okay, almost done. I think this is the last one. Yep. Okay, in this problem, we're given the focus and we're given the directrix. So the focus is at 3, -4. And the directrix is x equals -5. So is that a horizontal line or a vertical line? If it's x equals, it's vertical. So x equals -5 would be here. That's going to help us know that our parabola is going to be opening to the right. So that means that P is going to be positive, and it also means that the y's are what are being squared. The x's are being squared when it's opening up or down. Left or right, it's the y's being squared. So I need the vertex, and then from the vertex I'll be able to figure out P. Well, the vertex should be halfway between focus and directrix. So what's halfway between those? It looks like right here would be halfway, and you can count over like 1 in from both directions, 2 in from both directions, 3 in from both directions until you get to here. So that vertex is at the point -1, -4. And it's opening right. And so to get P, figure out the distance between vertex and focus, or vertex and directrix. So we'd be going over 1, 2, 3, 4, looks like. So P is 4. Same thing here. That would be a distance of 4. All right, so plug it into the equation and we're done. So y minus k, -4, squared equals 4 times P, which is 4, times x minus h, which is -1. So clean it up a little bit. It'll be y plus 4 squared equals 16, x plus 1. Okay, so that's our notes for today. So just going back here, up, down is when the x's are squared, left, right are when the y's are squared. If P is positive, it's going to open right. If P is negative, it's going to open left. Or here, if P is positive, it'll open up. Or if P is negative, it'll open down. So be cautious of what is being squared, the x's versus the y's. And just remember, P is the distance from vertex to focus and vertex to directrix. So make sure that you draw sketches because it's very helpful to figure out which way it's opening and to figure out what P is. Okay, so now you can work on your 9.1 day 2 assignment on your assignment sheet.